how does the men's national team create that moment? Well, they're probably going to need some explosive plays. They're probably going to need some game changers, in other words. And so the debate today is our striker debate. And as we've seen this year progress and continue to go, Flo Balogun, in my mind, is obviously still our number one, but, there have been some other options that have emerged. Obviously, we got Ricardo Pepi, who scored recently, and he's looked great since coming back off of injury. I mean, he had a strike recently that was, that was special to watch. I watched that one on repeat a few different times. Patrick Ajiman, you got Haji Wright, and obviously you have Josh Sargent, who just came back to Toronto, over $20 million for that transfer. So you got a couple of different options in there. I still think Flo is probably our best option, but Ryan, I'll give you the floor. Who do you think, who are you leaving off the table in this collection?
So out of the five, Balogun for sure. I think it's Ricardo Pepi as well as he's the number two. But also I got to put into account how well Haji Wright has played and Patrick Ajiman for their championship sides and in EFL.
Yeah.
I think ultimately Josh Sargent's out. I think the whole transfer debacle, he's out. That's just my reality. I think he's out there. If I'm being honest, I think it's Ajiman who's out. I know we interviewed his coach a couple months ago, and I like his story. I think it's a really good story, Patrick Ajiman, but ultimately, I think Ajiman doesn't make the team. I don't like the way he plays in terms of the grand scheme of things. Can't dribble. It seems like he can't dribble. He seems a little bit slow compared to the other options, but I ultimately think it's just his touch in the final third that I think is lacking whenever he plays for the U.S. men's national team, that is. I think he does, I think he's, Coventry? I think he's Coventry. Or Derby, one of the two. I forget which one. Haji Wright and Ajiman, I mix up who's on what team sometimes. It's Derby or Coventry, I forget which. But no, I think both of those players are playing really well. I think Ajiman specifically has been playing really well recently for his club. But I think if we're trying to have a miracle on ice, grass moment, artificial turf moment, it's got to be. I don't think Ajiman can be on the roster. I really don't. I think he's slow. I don't think he can dribble. I think Pepi, despite being, I think form does play a little bit of a factor for the third striker role. But I also think Balogun has to be number one. I think he's better in the final third. He has better touch. I think he's developed a little bit of chemistry with a guy like a Christian Pulisic, who obviously, if you can have chemistry with Pulisic, you should be able to be on the roster, be on the field. Pepi, as long as he can stay healthy, I think Pepi could be a good option. But sometimes with the men's national team, he could disappear in certain moments. But I also think Haji Wright was in the last World Cup. He scored a goal against the Netherlands in the knockouts, and I understand Pochettino, which rightfully so. Pochettino's like, well, whatever you've done before, it doesn't really matter up to this point. I get that, and I like that mentality, and I like that mindset. But at the same time, I think that does play a little bit of a factor over a guy like a Patrick Ajiman. Even Josh Sargent, I think, was on the last World Cup roster. But no, I think it's Flo. I think it's Wright, and I think it's Pepi for the three. I think Sargent and Ajiman are just left out. Obviously, there could be an injury to one of those three that I mentioned, and some of these guys could end up. But that's kind of one of the negatives of doing this on February 23rd. So,
yeah, the truth. I mean, you heard what Mauricio Pochettino had to say. He wants to find the best fit for this U.S. men's national team when making these selections in terms of, who he wants on the field. And obviously that makes sense. That naturally, that seems like the right thing to do in his position. That's what he's paid to do. But when I think about fit and I look at Patrick Ajiman, especially the way that he played during the Gold Cup run for the United States, and especially just during, Nations League into the Gold Cup, yeah, in a lot of ways, Ryan, I wasn't impressed. I think sometimes he does have lead feet. I think his finishing was just not where it needed to be. The last couple of times we've seen him, he just hasn't, they would put it on a silver platter for him and he would have tap-ins and he would miss. And it just seemed like for whatever reason, he wasn't connecting with the players that were around him. Now, mind you, that Gold Cup roster that we saw is probably going to look a lot different than what the World Cup roster is going to look
I
like.
Hope that's not the roster.
You didn't have a lot of your key players out there. So maybe that played a role in the fact that Ajiman didn't look as good as I think some people would expect him to. He wasn't surrounded by the right pieces, but he didn't impress me over the summer. And I think if there was one player that a lot of men's national team fans kind of keyed in on, just kind of weighing that team down, it was Patrick Agyemang. Now I like the kid as a person, but I just don't think he necessarily flows well with this team, or as well as Flo does. See what I did there? So yeah, I would probably leave Agyemang
Interesting.
off the list as well. Just don't love his style. He's had good runs, and again, you talked about what he's been doing at the club level. He's been great. He's been productive. I just don't think with the men's national team, seeing the way that he fits in the collection, or at least in the way that Mauricio Pochettino likes to play, and maybe that's the bigger issue. Maybe he just doesn't fit in the style of play that Mauricio Pochettino wants to play in, and so I think Agyemang is probably out for me. Josh Sargent as well. And it's tough because the way he started the year, the torrid start that he got off to, there was a moment there was a window where everybody kind of looked at Josh Sargent and went, okay, like is this the birth of like our next like main striker? And it died off so quickly. And unfortunately, when you talk about drama, you know, the drama with the club probably wouldn't carry over to the U.S. men's national team, since it doesn't have anything to do with the U.S. men's national team, but it kind of sidelined him in the way that he wasn't, at his best mentally. He wasn't at his best physically. We didn't see the most out of Josh Sargent, or as much as we probably wanted to this year. And so, is he at the same level as these other guys? I think he can be, but it's really hard for me to justify putting him in a position to have significant minutes in the World Cup if he hasn't shown that, or if he's only shown it in spurts. And he did show it in a spurt to begin the year, but I don't tend to believe that Josh Sargent is someone that can be really a difference maker on this World Cup team. As much as I hate to say that, because again, a lot of the stuff that he went through at the club level was not his fault, was not the product of his own doing. It's just stuff that he went through, and obviously he was frustrated with it, and his family and everything else that was wrapped into that. But yeah, this is probably the easy answer. There's no hot takes on this on my end. I'm not saying, hey, let's drop Flo and put Weston McKennie in as their number one striker, but I would probably drop off the bottom two. Yeah. So that's my take. That's not a hot take. I don't know. Do you have a piping hot take on this? Weston McKennie should be our main striker moving forward. How about that?
Yeah,
He's
no.
got to be our guy.
Yeah, no. Him and Flo could be on the field at the same time. No, I also look at it like this. For a third striker option, I think it's got to be one. He's got to be a certain style, and I don't think Agyemang or Sargent fits it. I think Haji Wright fits it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Is holding up the ball and either A, trying to see a game out, or two, the other reason that they're brought on is they're just there to be an aerial threat through the air. And I think Haji Wright checks both of those boxes. Agyemang, I think, can do one really well, and I think Sargent can do one pretty well, but together they don't have it. I think Haji Wright does have both. And I ultimately think that Haji Wright could be a better aerial threat. I think he can be better in link-up play. I think he could be better in shielding the ball, holding it up, and distributing it out wide. I ultimately think that's the best options. I think Sargent, always wanted him to work out way back in the day when he was at Werder Bremen, but it just really hasn't worked out for him. And he said he didn't even like Germany too. So there's that obviously as well. Agyemang, again, great story. If he were to get to a World Cup, it'd be an unbelievable story. That's a movie in itself. I know Hollywood might, if he somehow scores a game-winning goal, Hollywood would get behind that in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
but
probably.
no, I just think Agyemang is just kind of he's just I feel like I don't want to say he's an odd man out, but I mean what he's doing at Derby is unbelievable. I don't want to like discredit that at all right now, but I just don't like the way he plays. I truly don't. I honestly would rather have Weston be playing striker than Agyemang. That's just my thought, because just can't dribble. Can't dribble the ball, and it makes no sense how you're a professional soccer player and can't dribble the ball. So no, I don't think Agyemang's the guy. I really don't, and I think Sargent is just too much in his. He's got too much stuff going on. I personally, so I just don't think Sargent's in either. But no, it's a good debate just based on some of these numbers, like what these guys are doing. Balogun, 14 goal contributions in 32 with Monaco, which means he's playing a lot, which is a good thing too.
Yeah.
Also, I think playing time ultimately can help with development as well. Pepe 14 goal
Mm-hmm.
contributions in 23. Haji Wright 16 in 32 matches. Again, that's these bottom three are EFL championship players, so a little bit easier to compare as well. Adjuman 13 and
Mm-hmm.
31, and Sargent 11 and 24, which I think he's only had like 2 in the last like 10. So it's been a little bit
Yeah.
of a struggle, but no, I think a lot of these numbers are really similar. I think Pepe and Balogun, though, obviously being in top flights compared to Haji Wright and Adjuman Sargent, all in the championship, which is still a respectable league, I would say. But at the same time,
Yeah.
a lot of these are like they all kind of come in form too. So like Adjuman and Wright are all like in form right now. So you wonder if they can keep that up. Of course, the international breaks at the end of next month, so they got about a month
Mm-hmm.
left with their club until we're back to seeing them in March. So no, I ultimately just think that I think it's going to be those top three right there that are going to make it, barring injury, of course, because injuries are still a possibility.
Yeah, and injuries are, can be a concern, especially when you look at, what went on with Ricardo Pepi, but he's back and he's looked better than ever. And again, that last goal he scored was sick. So I was watching that
Yeah,
video,
first
and
game back
I
too.
still think Pepe has a lot to show us. And that's I'll be interested to see what he does show us in these upcoming windows, and what happens before the World Cup. So there's still stuff to be decided, but yeah, I mean, I like Ajiman, and I'm always a sucker for the stories of going from, small college to the top level
We
like
know.
that. It's always nice to see. Yeah. And we've obviously had a chance to talk with the good people over at Rhode Island, a little roadie. So it's nice. It's fun to see his emergence, and it's a great story. However, you're right. I don't necessarily think he fits the style of play that Mauricio Pochettino's trying to put out on the pitch. But coming up here in hour number one of the show, you made a video of this over the weekend and it went berserk.